Welcome to the channel. Hi, my name is Sam Colton. Before I tell you this story of sorrow, let me briefly introduce you to Emily, my ex-wife. I run 2 laps of the park every morning, work allowing. I am 5 feet 10 inches, 180 pounds and fit. Every week I swim a few miles and visit an old-fashioned gym twice to raise weights and spar under an MMA teacher. Although Bruce Lee is not here, I can hold my own. Thus, the 180 pounds largely represent muscle. Although I have a master's in computer technology, a postgrad in business management, and a bachelor's in economics, I am told I have a passing look to George Clooney. I got these at Oxford University, England, since my father works as a translator at the U.S. Embassy. I stayed to complete my studies while my father came back to the U.S. following his period of service. Working as a computer repair specialist, I manage an own company, along with a new base program covering a range of uses from gaming to military ones. Its capacity to automatically in real time handle problems is fundamental. It ought to be ready in 6 months to a year's time. Patricia Akapat. I love my sister and she adores me. We never have secrets from each other and share everything. My younger sister is 2 years apart. She is a junior partner at a reputable New York State legal firm now, working as an attorney. Emily, my ex-wife, remains trim at the gym at least 4 times a week and stands 5 feet 3 inches, 110 pounds. She has a killer body, 34B bust, 22/waist, and 33/hips, red hair and green eyes with a temper to match her face, looks like an angel. Her smile brightens the room. She works as a corporate attorney at Zeiss, a PR/advertising agency, having earned a law degree. First, we got together during Pat's graduation. Ami, Pat and Emily's sister, shared a dorm room with us and introduced us during the graduation celebration. As it happened, we were living just 3 miles away in the same mid-sized town, Freestone, Texas. We started dating 6 months later and hit it right away. 6 months later, we were married. Starting her career at Zeiss as a junior attorney at a low 5-figure salary plus bonuses, I worked for ABC Flight Controllers, assembling a mid-5-figure pay and bonus. The 3-bedroom house my grandparents left me was in a decent neighborhood. My sister received an inheritance lump sum, while Emily's sister and parents remained in New York. My parents had retired to Florida. Twice a year, we held family get-togethers for Thanksgiving, Christmas at different locations. Life was excellent. We were content with our modest income, nice automobiles, and 2 annual vacations. 2 years later, Emily advanced to junior partner, and things started to shift. She began to go out with the girls Friday night a few times a month and worked later. Naturally, I was dubious and went about my usual business, reading her emails, checking her underpants, even setting a keystroke recorder on her laptop. Though I know I'm paranoid. Just because you're worried does not mean they are out to get you. One of her evenings out, I even followed her. Nothing untoward, she didn't even dance with other males. Why then did I feel our marriage was flawed? Emily wanted to reach senior partner before we had a family, about another 5 years. She was content in her work. My work bored me, and there seemed no path ahead for promotion. It was a family business, hence only family members, even if they were as thick as a plank, were promoted. I choose to start a computer repair firm of my own, not the kind where you bring your laptop to the shop for repairs. I only deal with businesses wanting better security systems and system upgrades. Before diving in, I conducted a business study and projected a slow start. But after a year, I would be making more than I was right now. Sitting down with Emily, I tried to explain that although all forecasts indicated we would be better off in the long run, the next year would be difficult. I didn't want to muddy the waters, so I didn't tell her about the new software I was working on. She was dead set against it, wondering why gamble everything while we were doing so well. She was doing great, and I worked at a dead-end job, except for our shared account, which paid all the bills. Emily and I had always kept our money separate. We would each contribute the same to pay half the monthly bills and save the remaining half for ourselves. I left my employment and launched my new business out of savings and a debt on my house. I started advertising and phoning around a little workshop I hired, with an office attached. In 3 months, I was perfectly happy and broke even. My efforts on the new initiative were also going really nicely. One evening, Emily gave me a stunning blow. She claimed to be 3 months pregnant and to be carrying twins. Paranoia drove me to review the schedule and speculate about what she had worked away for a week in Miami for an important client. Right there, and then I realized she was cheating and made the instant decision to get a DNA test. She broke off all affection as soon as she discovered she was pregnant, at least to me. Fearing for the baby, She was insistent, so I faced at least a 6-month dry spell, even though I told she was overreacting and even had the doctor to tell her the same. We did all the normal things. I went to her relaxation courses with her, massaged her feet every night, rubbed oil into her swollen tummy to ease stretched on, and put up with her progressively poor moods. My company was off in the meantime. I had employed another computer guy, Greg fresh out of college, and assigned May as a receptionist. Emily seemed uninterested, hence I never bothered to talk about my business with her. I got the call, baby's on its way, come right away. One afternoon I was with an existing client talking about upgrading his servers. The client listened to me explain, then instructed me to depart and wish me congrats. I had been preparing since a few weeks, expecting this. Emily didn't have to call an ambulance as I lived not far from her. Emily was waiting for me home, her go-bag ready. I got her into the car, returned for her suitcase and the DNA kit, and drove her to the hospital. She was admitted to a prenatal ward with her own private room after the doctor checked her out. He said it would be a while yet. I was nevertheless exited by the possibility of becoming a father, even if I had doubts regarding the twins' paternity. The doctor advised me to go home. She stated it would be some time yet and would call me in time for me to attend the delivery. I left for home, ate, sat and waited, then collapsed into sleep. The phone called. Emily, completely dilated, was experiencing contractions every 7 minutes. The baby was almost here. 2:30 a.m. I grabbed a coat. Why are babies always born at odd times? I hurried to get to my car. I arrived at the hospital and recorded speed. He smiled at me, just in time, and I watched as the baby was delivered a few minutes later and the second followed. Taking them, the nurse checked them for all their fingers and toes and washed them. Her back was turned, so I swabbed each child for the DNA test while she helped clean my wife. Though I had already felt a connection with them, I really hoped they were mine. I had to be sure, though. Emily stared at me with sad eyes and said she loved me when I went over to kiss her tenderly. Emily was being transported to the recovery unit to get some sleep, so I was advised to go. I phoned everyone the following day to deliver the wonderful news. Specifically thrilled and eager to see their grandchildren were the grandparents. Pat and Ami promised to try to arrange some time off to visit their niece and nephew. On the way to the hospital carrying a lot of flowers for Emily, I dropped off the DNA kit and was advised it would take roughly 10 days. Emily would be staying at the hospital, the doctor stated, as her size had caused severe tears that needed to heal. For the next 5 days, I visited her every day, but she appeared disengaged and quiet. When I asked the doctor about this, he replied that she will get over it, that it happens occasionally. Her doctor stated she would be released Saturday afternoon when I visited her on Friday. I counted down the hours till I could pick them up, having the nursery ready for our new babies. Saturday morning, I checked to see everything was ready for her comeback and the safety cots were fastened tightly. At 1:30, I headed to the hospital to pick up my family. I directly walked to her room, but it was empty. I asked the nurse where my wife and kids were. She told me another man had already gathered them. They couldn't tell me who he was when I asked, so I tried Emily's cell, but couldn't get through. When the senior nurse arrived to investigate the disturbance, she reported it to security, who then phoned the police. Arriving cops found a man and a woman, both detectives, since this was a probable child theft. They were shown to the security room to review the morning's captured security footage. When they got back, Emily seemed to have departed with the man on her own will, but they would investigate it since they identified the man, but would not tell me who it was. They advised I to head home and would be in touch. Sick. I sat at home waiting for word. About 6 that evening, I peered out the door and saw the same 2 detectives knocking on it. When neither one would look me in the face, I inquired what was going on. The woman answered first. "Mr. Colton, we are unable to tell you where your wife and the children are. However, they are quite safe. I'm really sorry. I have no idea where my family is or why Emily won't respond to her cell phone." The next speaker was the male detective. "I regret to inform you that your wife left you and brought the kids with. Once more, I'm sorry. She stated her attorney would be in touch soon. Please do nothing. Foolish till you get back from her. I would hate to have to lock you down." They went then, and I was once more on my own. My hands were shaking. I felt hollow inside and wanted to be ill. My devastation was total. I had reached rock bottom. I started to cry. Sunday morning, I woke up having sobbed myself to fall asleep. Showered in showy clothes, I made breakfast on autopilot. I felt somewhat better after breakfast, and maybe Emily's folks knew something. Her dad answered the phone. Everyone left, saying they will be visiting following weekend. I told him what had happened and stopped him from talking. He claimed he would call Emily and get back to me, as he cannot believe Emily would act in such manner. It was almost lunchtime, so I went to Denny's and ordered a really unhealthy meal, mega burger, fries with onion rings, and a beer. Feeling better, I returned home and checked our answer phone to see whether any messages were there. None were. Turning on the TV, I was more focused on reviewing the events of the last few days and attempting to make sense of it all than genuinely viewing. When I gave up at last, I looked at the clock, past midnight, then went to bed. My thoughts would not shut down, so I gave up at 6 in the morning and got up, showered, and walked downstairs for some breakfast. Wondering what to do next, I sat staring at the TV's news. The phone rang as I was still seated there. Emily's attorney asked whether I could make it to a later that day meeting. We decided on 2 p.m., and he hung up. Maybe now I would find some answers. Arriving at his office, I was shown immediately in. I expected to see merely her attorney, but Jimmy Prescott, her boss, was sitting on the sofa. I merely waited since I needed answers, but I wouldn't speak first. As I had planned, this made everyone anxious. The lawyer spoke first. Mr. Colton, you have come here to talk about the terms of your divorce from Mrs. Emily Colton. Your wife and Mr. Prescott have here a short suggestion whereby she divorces you for irreconcilable differences. You maintain your business, your property, your retirement, all of your savings. She does the same, but you also signed a paperwork authorizing Mr. Prescott to adopt your children. For this reason, Mr. Prescott will fund $2 million into an account of your choosing. As I got up, I almost tipped the desk over. Not a fucking chance. My children are not for sale at any price. You can keep the whore for nothing. I don't want anything to do with her, so fuck off. Emily got up and spoke softly in a conciliatory manner. Look, Sam, I know I have, and I'm very sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Jimmy has been seeing me for some time now, and we really want to be married and are much in love. Jimmy wants to adopt ours, as he regretfully cannot have children. The kids would have all they could possibly want or need. Beautiful residence to grow up in, the best school, and a fantastic beginning of life. What could you provide? An old hand-me-down house and a dumb small computer repair shop. Why do you suppose I want out of your failure without ambition and without money? At least allow the children opportunity. Should you refuse to sign, I will show you to the cleaners. I'll take your house, half your income and support, half of your savings, your 401, your business, and on top of that, I'll make sure you never see your kids again. You are thus in a no-win situation. At least our way of looking at it yields something. Fuck you, Emily. First, you have no claim on the house. It is just mine. Half of nothing is still nothing. I have absolutely no savings. You make more than I do, hence support will be little. Though I only see my kids every other weekend, I am glad to pay child support for them. Regarding my company, without me, there is no business. For your information, I have number 401 for you to take. See you in front of court. Then I stood up and departed, 3 perplexed-looking folks behind me. I went straight to Denny's and ordered supper and a beer. After dinner, I drove home to a frigid, deserted house. Sitting with a beer, I watched TV still raging. Not checking the spy hole before opening it, I woke up shortly after 11 from a knock on the door and was still a little drowsy. The door was slammed in with such power as I opened it. I staggered backwards but stayed on my feet. 3 men hurried into the room trying to seize me, but I was wide awake now, and the first one went down with extended knuckles in the throat. The second one sought to force me into the floor and had me in a headlock. I fell after the third man struck me in the shin with a baseball bat while I was breaking the headlock. I started to lose consciousness as the first man was still lying down, choking. The other 2 were giving me a decent kicking. Thinking I was going to die and had to leave the cops some proof to pursue as I started to black out. The trio's leader raised me to my feet and said, "Now be a nice boy and sign the form or we'll be back," he said. He was almost in my face, so I headbutted him on the nose and felt warm liquid shoot across my face. I now had his DNA after pulling my handkerchief from my pocket and dabbing some blood onto it. He clutched his face, turned away screaming, and called me names. I started to black out only to be awakened when he kicked me in the ribs. I fainted out, fell down the wall. I woke up slowly, hearing conversations, but couldn't determine who they belonged to. I saw vague forms of who was in the room, but couldn't tell who. Then darkness returned. When I woke up the following time, the window let brilliant sunlight into the room. I looked about and saw a woman seated in an armchair. It paused to pinpoint her as Cam, the wife of my MMA teacher, Nick Wright. I attempted to talk, but my mouth was too dry. I just croaked. Looking up, Cam came over to touch the call button. I just crooned back when a nurse came in and checked my vitals. She smiled and asked how I was feeling. I swear they tasted better than the best scotch. She departed for a few seconds and came back with some ice chips for me to chew. Cam was quickly dialing with one hand while holding mine. How do you feel? Glad to see you're back with the living Sam. You supplied us quite a scare for a while there, like I have been hit with a semi. A semi would have most likely done less damage. A doctor arrived in the room just then. I'm delighted you woke up at last. 3 days of coma have passed, but I believe you have turned the corner now. Would you be able to eat something? Doc, I could eat a cow. First, pull out the horns and clean his ass. Everyone thought that was rather humorous, but when I tried to laugh with them, my side hurt so much, I nearly passed out, saying he will be back soon. The doctor changed my painkillers and instructed me how to click the button for more morphine, then left. For what seemed like hours, I lay in a semi-morphine-induced sleep. But when Nick arrived, it was just over an hour. Nick told me what had happened. I had been attacked in my house, and the neighborhood watch patrol had observed my front door open and investigated, discovering me laying in a pool of blood. They had phoned an ambulance, and the police discovered Nick's number on my phone under ice in an emergency. And he or Cam had been with me always. He informed me of my really severe injuries. My left tibia suffered a complex fracture. My radius shattered. 2 of my ribs cracked. My left lung was perforated. My kidney broke. My eye socket cracked. And my nose broke. Apart from that, he remarked I was good, which made me laugh once again. I choked, but the discomfort was not as severe. Cam and Nick departed to get home when I was in danger, and a detective entered the room introducing himself as Graham Coles. How much of the attack I remembered, he asked. When I shared with him the message the trio's leader sent, everything he was highly interested in was explained to him. When I told him I had a DNA sample on my hanky and he put it in an evidence bag, he seemed rather happy. I closed my eyes for a moment when I was done. When I opened them once more, he vanished and the outer darkness grew. When Nick visited the following day, he said I could stay at his house until I could get about again once I was released. When I asked him whether he would pick up the mail from my house, he indicated he would get it on his way home. When I asked whether he knew any competent divorce lawyers, he replied he did and would get back to me. After some time of conversation, I nodded off once more. The nurse waking me said that everything looked good and clean, free of any indication of infection from her changing my bandages. Shortly after food was presented, eating with one arm is fairly challenging, the least of which the nurse had to chop my meal for me. I slept well and woke up rested. The nurse gave me a bed bath, but I didn't get hard. I was still in too much discomfort. Nick arrived accompanied by a strikingly beautiful woman he introduced as my new attorney, Grace Miles. She affirmed I still had visiting privileges for my children and would take my case. We then reviewed the facts together. She left. Nick sat there as I went over the mail he had gathered. Initially enraged when I received the DNA findings, I later began to giggle. Since neither of the kids belonged to me, Emily was cheating both Jimmy and me simultaneously, a cheater. I explained to Nick what this meant when I had stopped laughing, and he almost passed a bowel. Having changed my mind and wanted to talk about a settlement, I called Grace and asked her to arrange a meeting between Emily and Jimmy, their attorney, and myself at the hospital. She set aside the next day a meeting in a borrowed office. When Nick pulled me into the office in a wheelchair with my arm and leg in plaster and tubes flowing into my body from drips, Emily's face looked, absolutely perfect. Black and blue, as most of my body was my face. Emily seemed really surprised by my gaze, while Jimmy merely gave me a smirk. Looking at my enemies, I spoke. Well, I changed my mind after some friends of yours visited, and don't even pretend to deny you set this up, Jimmy. The last words spoken by your thugs were sign the papers. Why would anyone else have spoken unless you sent them? To let you adopt the children without the $2 million inducement. My attorney has created a new contract for me to sign. Your document made me seem to be selling the children to you, and my attorney explained this to me. Since it is unlawful to sell another human being, this would have opened the way for me to be charged with human trafficking. Yet, you scored 10 for effort. I then turned over the paperwork to their attorney, who examined it somewhat suspiciously, and I went on. My lawyer and I have created a fresh settlement for you to sign. All in here? My lawyer gave the material to their attorney along with a copy for Emily and Jimmy to review. I answered once more, your proposition is to mine. Hence this agreement is as dissimilar from chalk to cheese. Allow me to run you through it. I keep my house and everything in it, including my savings, my business, both cars, and wife's jewelry. She also deposits into my attorney's holding account the whole 18 zizzen from his not-quite-secret account with mercantile credit. You fucking bastard, that's my money I earned, and you can't have it. My wife stammered. She was brilliant crimson with a vein pulsing in her neck. Jimmy looked at her funnily and said, I suppose he wasn't aware of her secret account. Jimmy pulled her gently back into her seat, still grinning at me. I believe that was the first nail in the coffin of their relationship. If he hadn't loved the kid so much, he might have dumped her there and then, stay seated and shut the fuck up, you deceitful bitch. You cheat. The grown-ups are chatting. None of them involve you. Except Nick, who was laughing to himself. Everyone seemed to be stifling a smile. Emily stayed silent, but changed from crimson to white quickly. Before I was rudely interrupted, I was adding as she earns much more than I do. She will also give me spousal support totaling to $500 per month, also into my attorney's account. Regarding the company you both work for, pay for breaking up my marriage and covering my damaged state. You will pay me one net of tax, also into my attorney's account, plus all my medical costs, my legal fees, and the whole cost of my aftercare to be specified by my attorney. 5 p.m. this coming Friday night will pay for all above. Jimmy stood there laughing uncontrollably to bust. You're fucking delusional. Why should we pay you everything we have? We came for this. 20%. What? 20% is what I said. I heard you the first time, but what does that mean? That's the expected loss of income in the first 2 years following a court decision against your corporation citing culpability in the split of my marriage and the alienation of my children and wife. Did you just pull that figure from the air as you made the whole thing up? Asked. No, I investigated your company's clients and pay scale in great detail. Since you are a publicly owned corporation, all the information is easily accessible on the website. It is all quite legal. Just consider how this will affect your father's campaign for congressman. They are, after all, running on a family values ticket. Then there's your clientele. You have a lot of show business and political personalities on your PR file. One sniff of scandal and they will turn from ship. Your advertising branch comes next. You have 2 children's clothes stores, a baby product company, and a sports goods manufacturer. Every famous company will toss you like a hot brick. And you will be revealed as the sacrificial lamb during a board meeting when all the garbage flies towards the fan. Hence, you find that $10 million is a reasonable substitute. Jimmy now looked quite unwell, not so arrogant in truth. My attorney will send you the entire amount. Better still, she should have it in her account by Friday at 5 o'clock. After that, nobody had anything to say, but I could see Jimmy still considering his escape. I carried on. Oh, and Jimmy, if you believe that my disappearance will enable you to rethink, I have forwarded the entire narrative to 5 out-of-state attorneys. Should something happen to me, they notify the media. The way he looked suggested that I had been exactly right in what I was thinking. He seems totally defeated right now. I called across my shoulder as we were walking away. 5 p.m. Friday. Grace questioned me why I had surrendered and let Jimmy adopt my children after we left and returned to my room after I had seemed so against it earlier. She looked over the DNA test results I handed her and started giggling. You cunning bastard, the children are not yours. I'm not sure, but I want to investigate as this shows she was concurrently cheating on Jimmy and myself. And when I learn, I'll make sure Jimmy finds out too. Sam, I would hate to go on your wrong side. You should have been a wonderful attorney. Thanks, but I lack the killer instinct. Actually, you do. You haven't yet utilized it. When the doctor checked in later that day, she told me I may go home the following day provided I had assistance available. I moved in with Nick and Cam said temporarily, so that's what I done. Twice a week I still had to visit the hospital to change my dressings and empty a jar containing pee to check that my kidney had recovered. Friday arrived, and I waited anxiously for 5 p.m. I should not have worried. My attorney called at 3:30 and said the money had been transferred to the holding account to show 10861-312. Fuck, I was rich. Far richer than I could have imagined. Grace had already paid her fair part and moved the remaining balance to my checking account. Daily life continued. Following 8 weeks of loving care from friends, I returned to my house, but felt lonely and the place appeared to be empty and depressing. I resolved to relocate to be close to my sister, the one I most loved. I arrived at work and summoned Greg and May to a conference. They understood when I said I needed a fresh start far from here. I then thanked them and went on to say how fantastic they had done. Then I shocked them by assigning them business ownership, including all the money they had earned while I was away. I said my goodbye and brought them both to supper. My good friends Nick and Cam will be next up. I brought them out to supper and showed them a check for $5,000 for my convalescence care. They tried to reject me, but I said Jimmy's employer had to pay for my care, so really it was his money, not mine. Therefore they accepted. We sat drinking a glass of wine after dinner, and I informed them I was heading to New York to be close to my sister. Nick asked me about my intended purpose for my residence. I indicated I would most likely rent it. He started to fidget and seemed somewhat ashamed, so I urged him to spit it out. He told me that Eric, his eldest son, had a job lined up with a nearby company after recently completing his engineering degree. Not only that, but he plans to marry his fiancée even though they have nowhere to live and she is pregnant. Would I be ready to rent his house? They clearly wanted not to live with his parents for understandable reasons. Not only would I be lending a young couple a start in life, but I would also be aiding friends. Nick was to establish the rent based on what they could reasonably pay. I instructed him, and since I wanted the money they were to use for a collegiate savings account for their newborn child's schooling, Ken gave me such a strong hug that I knew she fractured my ribs once more. Nick was crying. The next day, I phoned Patty to let her know what had happened and asked whether I can stay with her till I had somewhere of my own. She was happy and got to work planning our activities. 3 weeks later, I closed the door on my house for the last time and sobbed a little on the drive over to hand the keys over to Nick's. I also dropped Emily's pink slip for her automobile and advised him to hand it to his son as housewarming gift. Hugs all around and a teary goodbye with a pledge to stay in touch. After an exciting 2-week road journey, I arrived at Patty's house. I was not in rush, so I stopped when I felt like it and spent a little while. Patty tried to hug me until at last she let me go when I claimed I cannot breathe. We were heading out to supper with a buddy. She led me to my room. There's no need to dress. Slacks and a shirt would be great. We would meet her friend there for a laid-back supper. As we arrived, Emily's sister Ami was seated at the table waiting for us. We proceeded to a decent diner with waitress service and a well-stocked bar and knew I had been set up. I was first furious, but I knew I couldn't stay furious at Patty for very long, so I chose to just roll with it. Ami got up and hugged Patty as we arrived to the table. To my astonishment, she hugged me exclaiming what a bitch Emily was and wished she cooked in hell. Ami worked in accounts for an advertising business and lived close by. The evening proceeded quite nicely. Ami was the first to bring me into the dance floor when we arrived. We danced 2 waltzes and 1 slow dance, then came back to a smiling Patty. You two looked just like a couple out there, quite right together. Ami went brilliant red, and I hurried back to the gents. For the rest of the evening, I danced with both Ami and Patty, but stayed away from the slow pieces. We put Ami in a cab at the end of the evening and phoned another for ourselves. Patty just laughed and went to bed when we got home. Me, even though I chastised her for setting me up. We house searched the next day. I preferred the routine of cleaning the yard and mowing the lawn over the apartment I had grown accustomed to living in. It would also be useful for having people over when I made some, or for organizing a barbecue or party. Although the house prices astounded me, we were in the commuter belt for New York City, so I had to bite the bullet and pay the cash for what I desired. After several weeks of looking, I found a 3-bedroom starting house with separate living and kitchen/dining area. The fact that it was in a safe community with only one way and past a security guard really sold it to me, even if it also had a fair-sized backyard and front lawn. The community claimed to have a suitable pool with a gym and play area for families with young children. Patty loved it and wanted to move in with me. Just kidding. It also included a babysitter service. I had to furnish and decorate the house before I moved in. And I also had to buy all the typical items including towels, pots and pans, and other such things. I had luck in that it included all the kitchen appliances, but I had to buy food and other basics. Ami and Patty were fantastic in helping me decide what I needed. However, they lacked the woman's touch and looked more homelike and less like a guy cave. I set one area with my own design motherboard and operating system running on top of the range computer and a desk, a workbench, several cabinets, and of course a fire-resistant safe. Patty and Ami urged me to have a housewarming party. The house was crowded with Patty's and Ami's pals as I knew none here. I believe the intention was to have me befriending some of the visitors. It seemed to work as I was now on multiple people's phones and buddy lists on social media accounts. Parties and barbecues practically every weekend defined the next 3 weeks. I practically never considered Emily anymore. I was loving my newly discovered notoriety. Ami and I had grown close over this period, more than friends but not yet lovers. Ami and Patty were meant to be taken to the theater one evening, but Patty called off at last minute citing stomach aches, so Ami and I headed alone. We were seated watching the taming of the shrew Ami when she leaned over to grab my hand. Given that the most we had done was a cheek kiss, I was not prepared. We grabbed a taxi back to Ami's apartment complex following the play, and as I escorted her to the door, the taxi turned away. I swore since it was practically hard to find a cab this far out of town. Ami just laughed. I said it wasn't funny. I would have to walk 2 miles home, and said, in that case, you had best stay the night. She then pulled my head down to give me the most sensuous kiss I had ever had, took my hand and walked me to the front door and pulled me in. She started making out right away as she walked me to her bedroom. I was standing there staring blankly when she stated, "Just what does a female have to do to get slept with you?" I waited so long I figured it was time I moved first. That was the most wonderful night I have ever had. Now let me repay the compliment. What treatment did you administer to me? I never have done that before. Thank God she did. I would never let you leave from this bed. Fuck, I'm shattered. My sister must be insane to offer you up. At 1 p.m. we woke up at last and realized we were more hungry than in any other session. We went down to the neighborhood deli and placed some coffee and lunch orders. We returned to Ami's flat after lunch to go over what had happened. Ami stated she envied her sister and had fancied me from our first meeting. She confided in Patty after we split up and sought for her assistance in bringing news together. Naturally happy, Patty said she was sure I would be interested once Emily was gone. I stated I was intrigued as soon as I spotted her at Patty's when I got there, but I felt it would be a bit tacky approaching my wife's sister. I kept my distance. Ami said she understood and was appreciative that I had weighed her feelings before making a move, but she couldn't wait anymore, so she and Patty had connived to organize last night. She said she didn't want you to think it was just a rebound thing. We both laughed good about it. Then Ami texted Patty, "That's done." Ami drove me home to change as I still had on yesterday night's clothes and needed a change. Ami was not like her sister, and I felt entirely at ease with her. When she kicked the least little item and started a fight, there was no wondering when she would do it. Hattie reddened on it numerous times and appeared delighted for us. We just seemed to fit. I had been working on my project during the interim, and at last it was completed. This program's and hardware's adaptability was their beauty. It might be adjusted for military use, gaming, aviation, both commercial and light aircraft, and even automobile application. Since I knew the thorough testing by players would reveal any flaws, I chose to contact one of the top game developers. I faced some mistrust when I approached the gaming company because they already had the best programmers in the world. Following my new approach, they requested a 3-month trial. I agreed to provide them sealed units and tamper-proof software. They convened a meeting to go forward once the trial was over. I went with a sister who is a corporate attorney, and one of her coworkers specialized in this kind of negotiating, knowing they could sell the patents on and would also make 5 times that in game sales worldwide. #games wanted to purchase the patents from me and paid a fair 1,2, declaring that I would only sell the rights to manufacture under license for a 10-year period. I would seek 5 and a 1% override on all applications using my hardware and software over the same period. After several hours, we agreed on a 10-year compromise of $65 million and 5%. Contracts were written, signed, and a handshake sealed the agreement. Though I wasn't finished yet, I was suddenly a quite rich man even after taxes. I conducted comparable negotiations with the military civilian aeronautical department, the top aircraft supplier, even one of the top automakers. After taxes, my cash terms were valued at more than $250 million, and with a 10-year estimate worth more than $3.5 billion, I could not understand the riches. I now possessed and sought guidance on investment if I simply left it in the bank. The interest at a conservative estimate would be more than $12 million. Before taxes, she was renting her apartment. My sister was seeing another attorney. Omi and I were living together now. She was becoming rather serious. Now just over a year had passed since I left to begin a fresh life, and I decided it was time to exact some retribution on the 2 people who had caused me much pain. Sitting down with Omi, I told her I still wanted retribution on her sister and asked whether she was okay with it. She answered, "Burn the bitch, and if I can help, just ask." We sat and plotted several different scenarios, but ultimately, we chose to wait a bit more to carry out our retribution. The phone rang immediately after we had completed dinner. Her assistant Daw from Freestone, Texas, they wanted me to testify in 3 weeks, and had captured the individuals who had attacked me. Of course, I agreed. Ami insisted she come with me when the time came, so we agreed to have a quick trip and be here the week before the trial. We flew the 600 miles to Texas, and Nick picked us up from the airport and deposited us at our motel. As a thank you, we brought Nick and Cam to dinner at the Regency Club under restrictions. In their cocktail gowns, Cam and Ami looked stunning, casting Nick and I in shadow. I wore my newly acquired 2000 handcrafted Italian suit, while Nick had on his best going-to-church outfit. 4 of us looked really good for visitors. Since we could never have afforded before my newly discovered riches, none of us had ever been into this restaurant. Arriving in a limousine, I wanted to make it memorable for Nick and Cam. A uniformed doorman unlocked the car doors first, then the restaurant door. The head waiter showed us where to sit as we arrived. Cam and Nick looked left at the thought of this evening out as a lone pianist played gentle music. We ordered a light appetizer of melon and palma ham cut so thin one could see through it. Then followed by our own selection of the main meal, which was a salad. A fruit salad, to conclude all washed down with both a full-bodied red and a white dessert wine. As we were savoring our wine and eager to check the dance floor, pointing them out to everyone, I looked around the restaurant and noticed Emily and her ass-wipe husband Jimmy seated on the other side with another couple. Ami said she had to use the powder room and got up to go. Cam followed. Why did they always go in pairs? Naturally, Emily and Party had to pass before they could reach the powder room. Emily looked like she had seen a ghost and put her palm over her mouth as I watched Ami stop and greet her and point to Nick. Then Ami said something else that made Cam laugh and leave Emily up and bolted out of the restaurant with Jimmy. When the women came back, I asked what Ami had said to set off that reaction. Ami claimed after Cam said hi, Emily had asked her who she was with. I'm with another millionaire sitting over there. She then pointed at me. I have to thank you for divorcing your husband. We were intended for each other. You obviously traded down and then turned away. I just don't see what you see in this stuffed monkey. We danced and laughed about Ami's run-in with her sister late into the evening. Cam and Nick had to work. Ami and I handled tourist-type tasks and visited places. We even spent a day at a gun ranch firing every kind of weapon. Ami turned out to be a very good show, far better than I could have imagined. We danced plenty and went out to dinner in the evening. The day before the trial started, we went to dinner at Nick and Cam's place. I have to admit that home-cooked food tastes far better than restaurant cuisine. We all toasted their nuptials when Nick broke the news to us following supper that his son would be marrying his fiancée in spring. The Ada informed us it was a slam dunk when we met with him before the trial started. My having supplied them his DNA had helped them to identify the trio's commander. He was ready to roll over on his 2 companions who were also in detention since it turns out he had quite a record for violence. This would be his 3rd strike. Their trial would take place following his evidence. They were temporarily away. He added that since I had damaged his voice box, the one I had hit in the throat was still croaking like a frog. The drawback was that none of the 3 were ready to name Jimmy Prescott. Prescott paid them out to remain silent, according to the Ada, and nobody wants to annoy his father, the congressman, by charging his son of conspiratorial to murder. We stayed through all 3 trials, and the result pleased me. For ratting out his 2 friends, the leader received a 15-year reduced sentence. The one I struck in the throat only received 2 years as he did not really participate in the attack. The other one got 5 years since it was his first offense. After Nick and Cam lifted us to the airport, I handed Nick an envelope and advised him not to open it until we had taken off. I had made the deeds to my former house for his son's wedding present inside, but I had only shown them to his son as I knew how delicate wedding vows were. When we arrived home and settled, I went into my office and called my sister, inviting them out for supper Friday night without informing Ami. Friday arrived, and I informed Ami we were headed to supper with Patty and her partner. Ami was happy, and that evening we were all gathered by limo driven to a well-chosen restaurant 3 weeks in advance. After a really filling dinner, we were drinking our wine. A man wearing a gypsy costume with a violin stopped by our table to perform a gypsy love ballad, watching me descend on one knee and approach Ami. The entire diner was she answered yes through tears of delight and the loud applause of the whole restaurant, and her expression was priceless. Patty walked around the table, hugged Ami, and said, "Welcome to the family." We danced the remaining evening away before the limo picked us up and drove us home. The wedding was scheduled for early spring, and invitations were sent out. I sensibly remained out of the planning and let Ami and Patty take front stage. We would be married in a nearby church, and I paid all the out-of-town guests' lodging bills using a whole floor of the Hilton for their 3-day stay. Everybody had fun, and the wedding was a magnificent spectacle. Saying they hadn't had so much fun in years, Nick and Cam asked us to their son's wedding in 2 months' time. Along with daily excursions and evening dancing, Ami and I spent 2 weeks sailing the Caribbean. We needed another holiday and came back worn out. I had very little to do as I had assembled a troubleshooting crew to handle any issues involving my new program and hardware. I was in no hurry since I was playing the long game and was organizing the next phase of my retribution. Even labeled as the ideal couple, Ami and I were cited in some of the society magazines. I never gave up on my vengeance. Everything they had done and tried to do to still wounded me as time passed. My ex-wife left me to trade up and schedule time for phase 1 almost 9 years ago. Over the past 5 years, I have had a pie company compiling data on Emily, Jimmy, and everyone else they seemed connected to, including her former boss, Troy Simmons. Given Troy's potential fatherhood of Emily's twins, I especially sought a DNA profile of him. The researchers came upon some quite fascinating information. 1. The twins belonged to Troy as I had guessed. 2. Emily still sought 2 other men and Troy for love on the side. Jimmy was gone loving his pa and a range of hookers. I started the first half of my plan. Your infertile Dan's DNA doesn't match Troy Simmons does. Hence, I sent Jimmy a copy of the twins together with Troy's DNA with a letter. Do the calculations. This knowledge made it abundantly evident that the twins were not hence Emily had to be loving Troy while she was dating Jimmy. Stated another way, she was simultaneously cheating Jimmy and myself. To lighten the pot, I also emailed Jimmy a copy of her current affairs. I then backed off and saw the stench fill the whirling air circulation. 2 months later, Nick called to let me know Jimmy had kicked Emily out and had used their prenup to keep the kids as he had adopted them. She went with nothing, and nobody knew where she had disappeared to. To discover whether her parents knew anything, Ami phoned them. Her dad advised her not to get in touch with him once more and stated he had wired her a couple of grand. She knew now how it felt to be betrayed and lose her children. Phase 1 complete. She still had to have had her laptop since her email was still active. I forwarded her the Pie's report on Jimmy and some images of him with his hookers and cheaters as I assumed I would be stirring the pot. That ought to create some turbulence in the divorce. A few days later, Ami and I were sitting in front of an old film when the security gate's intercom chimed. I requested the on-duty guard to wait a minute so I may ask Ami whether Mrs. Prescott could visit our residence. She said, seeming as bored as I felt. Let's hear what she has to say, so I instructed the guard to let her inside. A little while later, someone knocked on the door. Ami unlocked the door to find what I could only characterize as a total shamble. Her clothes appeared to have been slept in. Her hair looked as like it hadn't seen a brush in days, and she wore no makeup. Ami beckoned her in, and as she was walking in, I observed she avoided looking at me straight. Ami handed her coffee, and she appeared appreciative of it and took it. I started the discussion since Emily came and sat down across from me, but did not look at me. Though part of me felt terrible for the broken wreck in front of me, I was also furious as hell at her, until I remembered what she had done to me. A broken wreck I had helped to produce made me feel a bit bad. You look like trash bound with thread. What the devil happened to you? That did it. She broke down entirely. We couldn't get a word out of her for the next 10 minutes. Then she started and through tears explained. He somehow learned I was seeing Troy the whole time and the twins weren't yours. He had little trouble working out. Then he discovered I was still seeing Troy following our marriage. He went wild and tossed my out in exactly what I was wearing. I booked into a motel. I still had my laptop in my car and my car keys, and a couple of $1,000 in my account. After what I did to you, nobody would talk to me. My family denounced me and I had no friends. I called his father Barry, who informed me he no longer needed me as he now had his heir to the family riches. When at last my dad agreed to speak with me, I phoned him and he wired me a few $1,000 and advised not to phone again. Having nowhere to go, I spent the rest of my money traveling here hoping Ami would pity me. If I were on fire and you didn't expect any aid from you, I know you wouldn't piss on me. If it means anything at all, I truly am sorry for what I did. I was cruel and selfish and deserved my destiny. I miss my children and wish they back. Though I was a lousy wife, I was a great mother. She glanced at us like a kicked dog and stopped her precisely practiced speech. Though I knew she had practiced her speech, what she stated was essentially accurate. Hence, I felt sad for her. I also owed Jimmy a beating, but could wait. He had been the orchestrator of my suffering, and his turn was rapidly approaching. Emily reported not having eaten in 2 days when Ami inquired whether she was hungry. Ami produced some bacon, eggs, hash browns, then pancake with syrup. She requested for more coffee, which Ami supplied, and wolfed them down as quickly as she could. Ami then showed her to the guest bedroom for her shower. She left some clothes she would fit Ami on the bed while she was showering. Ami and I spoke about what to do with our unwelcome guest as Jan was showering and getting ready. Ami remarked as much as she hated her Emily. She was her sister and felt compelled to assist. I consented solely because it would irritate Jimmy to watch Emily recover. Up to a point, though. Until we could arrange alternate plans, we decided to place Emily in the guest bedroom. Tomorrow, Ami would take Emily clothes shopping at Walmart. Looking considerably rested, Emily returned downstairs. We told her the wonderful news about her circumstances, and she began to cry once more. Not too long later, everyone went to bed. Sitting and talking into the early hours, Ami and I made some decisions we hoped would assist sort this problem. Emily had beaten me to it and had coffee on buttered toast waiting. I was used to rising early and visiting the gym and pool for an hour. I joined Ami as she was already seated at the table eating. Emily joined us. "Sam, I'm so lucky I'm not sure what to say. I honestly didn't expect this kind of greeting. Emily, having had your family stolen from you, what you did was unforgivable. Thanks to Ami and the love we share, I believe I can at last forgive you even though you still really wounded me. Though I will never forget what you did. I will not linger on it anymore, and I do not want you to apologize anymore. This chapter closes and a new one opens. While I look for you someplace to reside, you should go shopping with Ami this morning. For your basics, only Walmart today. Later on, we should buy more appropriate clothing for you. See you later." I am now headed to the gym. The girls were gone and the children were at school when I arrived home, so I began hunting for Emily's accommodation. When I happened to phone the housing officer for our safe community, he mentioned he had a one-bedroom starter house for rent just 2 streets away. When I visited it, I was shocked to find it ready to move into and completely equipped. Wanting to rent out his residence, the owner was an Army officer dispatched on a 3-year posting to Europe. Following a decent inspection, I paid the rent for a year plus the deposit against damage. I told the girls the great news when they arrived home with enough clothing to satisfy Oxfam. Emily hugged me and between tears thanked me. Ami just grinned at me and blew a kiss. Then she turned to face me and whispered, "I must have been hit by the Martian cheater ray. I don't know what on earth I was thinking when I screwed up our marriage. I should never have let you leave, Ami. Kindly watch after him. You will never find a better man, I know I won't." Then she hurried upstairs to hide her emotions when we were alone. I informed Ami my intentions to help Emily and destroy Jimmy and his dad. We loaded Ami's van and had the remainder delivered the following day as Emily was shopping for basics for her new house. The girls found a house for everything it was, rather like Hermione's handbag from Harry Potter. I really wasn't sure the house would fit everything we got. We chose to help Emily financially in order to empower her. We handed her a credit card with a 1,000 limit monthly and one zzz to place into her check account. Extra hugs and tears all around. Ami told me that night in bed she was glad of me for not kicking Emily when she was depressed and for being so sympathetic. I only wanted Emily to treat her next man better and have learnt her lesson. We all went over to Emily's house to assist her in settling in the next day. Not that it required it. Emily insisted she do all the housework herself and started from top to bottom. She then urged we all come over tonight for supper since she wanted to make something especially for us. We left the children with a sitter and headed 10 minutes to her house. She sat us down and laid a mouth-watering dinner, topside beef, baked potatoes, and mixed vegetables, including one of my favorites, in front of us, wrapped in foil and roasted in the oven for 20-25 minutes. Fine beans with carrot fingers and parsnips topped with garlic butter and sprinkled with honey. Dessert, a cooked apple cord and packed with raisins, baked in the oven till soft, then topped with ice cream. We left stuffed right to the gills. Emily settled, and over the next several weeks, Ami and I agreed we would assist her with her divorce. So I scheduled a meeting with an attorney Patty suggested. I showed up on time, and Brian Scott introduced himself. Emily's issue was conveyed to her, and although his reaction to her treatment wasn't great, he agreed to take the matter further. Our major worry was getting the kids back. We were not concerned about the financial aspect of things. I would figure everything out. I stated I had an idea and mentioned I had granted Jimmy permission to adopt the kids. When Brian mentioned it would be a significant obstacle, I questioned what would happen should the children not be my first choice. I said I had been handed $2 million for the kids, but turned down and granted him permission to adopt for no financial benefit, but sought $10 million as a compensation for alienation of affection against both Jimmy and Zai's advertising. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, and they had agreed to this to keep Zai's name off the divorce proceedings. Should I violate the agreement, I would have to pay back the payment. I sent Brian the DNA reports proving Troy Simmons was the donor, thereby proving the children were not mine. Jimmy had no claim on the children, and the adoption was not official either. Emily could get them back. I had no one to harm the children. I was not doing this just for Emily. It would upset Jimmy and his father as well. Brian replied to leave it with him, and he will come back to me. I was under no idea that the children loved, they just wanted someone with their name to carry on the business. That evening, I informed Amy what I had done. She agreed completely. Thus, we invited Emily over. Emily seemed a little nervous when she first arrived until I clarified my work. She thanked me fervently and flung her arms about me. She then understood what she had done and withdrew with her hand covering her lips, tears breaking through and apologies underway. We both said simultaneously, "Don't worry about it. Leave it at that." Several days later, Brian got in touch and asked me to visit his office carrying Emily as he would be representing her rather than me. When we all three visited him, he put forth his idea. 1, he would present a motion calling for the adoption to be annulled. 2, he would get in touch with the Dawes office to let him know that Jimmy Prescott and his father Barry Prescott broke the law trying to buy 2 children in violation of the Anti-Slavery Act of 1865. 3 pursues the aforementioned offense. They had pushed Mr. Sam Colton into letting them adopt the 2 youngsters in question. Since Mr. Colton could not offer such an undertaking and the 2 children were not fathered by him, the following adoption is indeed void. The DNA certificates that are attached will prove this. For Mrs. Prescott has asked for her children being housed at 218, to be returned immediately against her will. 5, he would start Mrs. Prescott's lawsuit against Mr. Troy Simmons for beautiful harassment since he coerced the then Mrs. Colton into an affair in order to keep her job. 6, he would then start proceedings for Mrs. Prescott against Mr. Jimmy Prescott since he coerced Mrs. Then Colton into a beautiful relationship and eventually left her husband Mr. Sam Colton, thereby ruining her marriage. 7, he would start legal action against Zai's advertising for tolerating the beautiful harassment and even promoting the affair for Mrs. Prescott. The CEO, Mr. Jimmy Prescott, and the Cobb, Mr. Congressman Barry Prescott, were aware of and in fact supported said affair and the breakdown of her marriage. 8, he would start legal actions against Mr. Troy Simmons for alienation of affection that helped to destroy his marriage to Mrs. Emily Colton. 9, he would start legal actions against Mr. Jimmy Prescott for alienation of affection, which finally destroyed his marriage. 10, he would start cases against Zai's advertising for not including their own morals provision in their staff contract, knowing Mr. Simmons was having an affair with Mrs. Colton and neglecting to act against them. 11, he would start legal action against Zai's advertising for not including their own morality provision in their staff contract and for actually supporting the affair between Mr. Jimmy Prescott and Mrs. Colton, therefore guaranteeing the dissolution of Mr. and Mrs. Colton's marriage. 12, Mr. Sam Colton admits he signed a non-disclosure agreement for $10 million, and he would have to pay back said amount should he break his promise. Mr. Colton is ready to keep his promise and pay back the $10 million agreed upon according to contract. We all stood there surprised after reading Brian's proposal for handling not only Zai's advertising, but also Troy, Jimmy, and his father Barry. This was more vengeance than I could have dreamed for. Emily should be ready, as when the excrement hits the fan she would be covered in her share. She was ready to deal with the fallout and admitted her part in bringing this on herself. Brian should move right now, I advised him, and that Zai's will be undergoing a multi-pronged media exposure assault, mostly aimed at Troy Simmons, Jimmy Prescott, Barry Prescott, and at last Zai's advertising. Brian indicated he would be ready in 2 weeks, and I would launch my attack a week after. Brian would work to have the adoption revoked and Emma's children brought back to her in the interim. We left Brian's office with a fresh goal in mind, and at last I felt I was headed toward some justice for the treatment I had been subjected to. Brian did attempt to get the kids, but Jimmy and Barry brought in a slate of lawyers to contest the case. Brian released the remaining of his proceedings during the second week of the war. A week later, as agreed upon, I forwarded all the accumulated materials to every media source I could think of. This caused the procedures to go faster. They went for the jugular and camped outside the courthouse and all 3 homes of those named as soon as the media detected blood. As I expected, a flood of Zai's PR and advertising clients either threatening to terminate their contracts or acting as such. This resulted in a board of management emergency meeting for Zai's and Troy Simmons being sacked without severance pay. In an attempt to stop their esteemed clients from bleeding, both Jimmy and Barry Prescott had to step down. They also agreed to pay Emily and I a 7-figure fee. Along with the payoff I anticipated from my other lawsuits, I would more than cover the $10 million I owed for not closing my mouth. From all of this garbage came a gift for Americans. Congressman Barry Prescott's ticket for re-election was based on family values, so he was obliged to quit due to illness. Not long after he left, his use of campaign finances revealed anomalies, like paying hookers on the campaign trail and spending that money on a holiday trip. The FBI were also interested, and he was being called to answer for his behavior before a select committee. Less than a month after I told the public all claims had been resolved, Emily's children had been returned to her. Not long after their return, Ami and I drove Emily and the children to her parents' house for a reconciliation for all concerned. I told her parents I had forgiven her, and we were now, if not precisely friends, but at least amicable. I wanted them to forgive her too. Not hurting was the fact they were seeing their grandchildren for the first time. In epilogue, Barry Prescott served 3 years in jail after being found guilty of dishonest use of campaign money. After Jimmy Prescott was found guilty of attempted human trafficking for the crime of trying to buy 2 human babies, I at last exacted retribution against him. He also was found guilty of misplacing company money. 2 offshore accounts containing a sizable sum of money had been discovered, moved from his workplace computer. I wonder how that came about. He stayed 5 years in a government hotel. He would have only got 3, but he would not reveal where the other missing money came from. Actually, he didn't know. I had set them up. The last payback for having me beaten up was my bribing the prison allocator to house a really vicious drug dealer with a desire for male company. Emily moved to a larger residence, retook her bar tests, then started working for the same law company as Patty. We never socialized, but occasionally we baby-watched one another's children. Emily has not been on a date since she has been buried in her work and looking after the children. Thank you for watching video. Take care, everyone.